The night Paige Holloway watched a man get publicly humiliated over a scar, she was carrying 4 plates of salmon and trying not to cry about her own problems. It was a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that felt like it had lasted 3 weeks. The Meridian was the sort of restaurant where the lighting made everyone look expensive, where the bread cost $12 and people paid it without blinking, where Paige had worked for the past 2 years keeping her chin up and her opinions to herself. She was good at both. Table 14 was in her section. She noticed the man first because of the way he moved, or rather, the way the restaurant moved around him. The hostess, young and carefully trained in the art of subtle dismissal, had seated him at the edge of the room near the kitchen corridor. Not the worst table, just not the best one either, the kind of placement that said, "We see you," but not really. He had burns. The left side of his face, down his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. Not fresh. Old. The kind of scars that had been lived in for years. He was waiting for someone. Paige could tell because he kept glancing at the door with the particular expression of a person who is pretending not to watch. He had ordered sparkling water. He straightened his jacket twice. He was nervous and he was trying not to show it, and Paige felt a small ache in her chest because she recognized that kind of effort. The woman arrived at 7:15. Tall, in a red dress, the kind of person who paused slightly at the room register her. She found table 14. Paige watched from across the floor as the woman's smile, warm, practiced, gracious, flickered just for a second, just long enough. The man stood. He extended his hand. He said something. The woman's expression shifted through several emotions so quickly that only someone paying close attention would have caught all of them. Paige was paying close attention. "I'm sorry," the woman said, loudly enough that the table beside them looked up. I wasn't expecting this." "It's okay," the man said. His voice was even. "I don't think I can do this." She was already pulling her wrap tighter, already angling her body toward the exit. "I'm sure you're very nice, but I can't. I understand. It's not that I'm shallow, you don't have to explain." But she did anyway, because people who do things like that always have to explain, as if the explaining undoes the doing. She said something about not being prepared, about honesty being important, about how she hoped he found someone wonderful. She said all of this at a volume that carried, and by the time she walked out, 3 tables had gone quiet. The man sat back down. He picked up his water glass. He set it down again. And then he did something that Paige would think about for a long time afterward. He straightened his jacket for the 3rd time, as if he were still expecting someone, as if the gesture alone could hold him together. Paige walked over. She did not think carefully about this decision. She had 4 tables waiting and a manager named Keith who had already given her one warning that week about lingering, and she absolutely should not have been standing at table 14. But she was standing there, and she was looking at this man who was holding himself very still in the way that people do when they are trying not to fall apart in public, and she said the only thing that felt honest. "I'm sorry she did that." He looked up. Up close, his eyes were dark brown, and there was something in them that reminded her of a person who had learned to expect very little from the world, and had made peace with it, mostly. "You saw that. Everyone saw it," Paige said. "But I'm the one saying sorry." Something shifted in his face, more like the possibility of one. His name was Elliott Crane. She found that out because she asked, not in a professional way, not the "hi, I'm your server, and I'll be taking care of you tonight" way, but in the way that felt right when you were standing at someone's table at 7:20 on a Tuesday, and they had just been humiliated by a stranger in front of an entire restaurant. He was a structural engineer. He had the burns for 11 years, since a gas fire in a building he had been inspecting when he was 29. He said this plainly, without performance, the way people talk about facts they have accepted. Paige did not say, "I'm so sorry," the way people do when they want to end a conversation. She just nodded. She brought him the salmon. She did not charge him for the sparkling water. When Keith caught her eye from across the room, she gave him the look that said, "I know, I'll move faster," and she did. But she also kept coming back to table 14 more than was strictly necessary. Elliott stayed for 2 hours. He ordered dessert, which he claimed was because the lemon tart looked interesting, but which Paige suspected was because the restaurant was the kind of place where leaving too quickly felt like admitting something. When he left a tip that was almost embarrassing in its generosity, and a note on the receipt that said, "Thank you for the kindness." Paige read it twice in the back hallway, away from Keith and the salmon and the $12 bread. She did not throw it away. She did not expect to see him again. The Meridian was not the kind of place people came back to quickly. It was a special occasion restaurant, a first date restaurant, a business dinner restaurant. The kind of place that existed in memory rather than habit. So when Elliott Crane walked in the following Thursday and asked to be seated in her section, Paige stood at the hostess stand for a moment longer than was professional. He had a book with him this time. He sat down, opened it, and then looked up and found her already walking toward him. "You came back," she said. "The lemon tart," he said. "We don't have lemon tart on Thursdays." "That's disappointing." But he was almost smiling again. She brought him the Thursday menu. She came back 3 times more than necessary. When her shift ended at 9, she untied her apron in the back and thought very carefully about the fact that this was a bad idea, and then went and sat at the bar for a drink she did not particularly need. He was still there when she came out. He closed his book. They talked until the bartender started putting chairs on tables, which was the politest way a bar could tell you to leave. Elliott talked about engineering the way people talk about something they genuinely love, with specificity, with small tangential stories, with the kind of enthusiasm that forgets to perform itself. Paige talked about her degree in graphic design that she was currently not using, her apartment with the broken radiator, her younger sister in Portland, who called every Sunday and always asked when Paige was going to do something real with her life. "What does real mean?" Elliott asked. "Something that doesn't involve an apron," Paige said. He looked at her for a moment. "What would you do if you could do anything?" Nobody had asked her that in a long time. She had an answer ready. She always had an answer ready, the practical one, the sensible one. But what came out instead was, "I'd design picture books for kids. I have about 40 drafts at home that I've never shown anyone." She had not planned to say that. "Why haven't you shown anyone?" "Because then they'd be real," she said, "and they could fail." He looked at her with those dark, steady eyes. Things can also succeed. It was not a profound statement. It was actually a fairly simple one. But something about the way he said it, without urgency, without the particular evangelical energy of people who want you to be better for their sake, made it land differently. She gave him her number that night. He texted her at 11:15. "Good night, Paige. Those picture books sound real to me already." She read it standing in her kitchen with the broken radiator making it sound, and thought, somewhat against her better judgment, that she was in considerable trouble. They had been seeing each other for 6 weeks when she met his mother. Lorraine Crane was a woman who had been beautiful for so long that it had become less a fact about her and more a kind of policy. She was 71, immaculate, and possessed of the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have always had their preferences accommodated. She lived in a house outside of Scottsdale that had a name, Whitmore, written on a stone at the gate, which Paige thought was a very specific kind of statement. Elliott had told her about his mother with the careful, measured tone of a person delivering a weather forecast. "She's very particular. She has strong opinions about things. She'll be polite." He paused, mostly. Paige had dressed carefully. She had brought flowers. She had rehearsed absolutely nothing, because she found that rehearsing conversations made her wooden. And if there was one thing, Lorraine Crane was not going to find her, it was wooden. Lorraine opened the door, looked at Paige with an expression that catalogued everything in approximately 4 seconds, and said, "You must be the waitress. Not you must be Paige. Not so lovely to meet you. The waitress." "Paige Holloway," Paige said, extending her hand. "These are for you." Lorraine accepted the flowers with the manner of someone receiving something they hadn't asked for. "Come in." The house was beautiful and extremely quiet. Lorraine served tea in the sitting room and asked Paige questions with the efficiency of someone conducting an evaluation. Where was she from? What did her parents do? Had she finished college? What were her plans? Each question was perfectly pleasant and carried underneath it the weight of an entirely different question. Paige answered honestly. She was from Tucson. Her father was a retired postal worker, her mother a school librarian. She had a degree in graphic design. She was currently working at the Meridian while she figured out next steps. Said Lorraine. It was the most diplomatic sound Paige had ever heard. Elliott sat through this with the patience of a man who had learned that some situations simply had to be endured and who would apologize properly later. He caught Paige's eye twice, and the look said, "I know, I'm sorry, please hold on." After an hour, Lorraine said she was tired and saw them to the door with great courtesy and no warmth whatsoever. In the car, Elliott said, "I'm sorry. She thinks I'm after your money," Paige said. A pause. "Yes, is there a lot of money?" Another pause, longer. "My grandfather started Crane & Associates in 1971. We have 8 offices across the Southwest." Paige looked out the window at the highway. "You could have mentioned that. I was going to. I wanted you to know me first." She thought about that. She thought about a man who straightened his jacket 3 times while waiting for someone who would walk out on him, who had learned to introduce himself carefully, who chose his lemon tart Thursdays at a restaurant where the hostess had given him the table by the kitchen. "Okay," she said. "Okay? I'm not after your money, Elliott. I know. Your mother doesn't." "No," he said. "She doesn't." Things with Lorraine did not improve quickly, because things with Lorraine were not the kind of thing that improved quickly. She called Elliott often. Paige could tell when it was his mother on the phone because he got a particular expression. Not unhappy exactly, more like a person bracing against wind. Lorraine had opinions about where they went for dinner, about the apartment Paige lived in, about the fact that Paige was still at the Meridian. That last one hurt more than Paige liked to admit, mostly because it was the thing she was already saying to herself at 2 in the morning. She had been working on the picture books again. Elliott had asked to see them, carefully, without pressure, the way he asked for most things. And she had finally shown him 3. He had sat with them for a long time. He had asked questions about the characters, about why she had chosen certain colors, about the story logic in the second one. He had not said these are great in the reflexive, finishing the conversation way. He had said, the girl in the red coat, what happens to her next? And Paige had said, without thinking, she finds out she was brave all along. That's the whole book, Elliott said. You already know it. She had sent 3 samples to a small publisher in Portland the following week. She told no one except her sister, who screamed loud enough that Paige had to hold the phone away from her ear. Meanwhile, things at the Meridian were getting complicated. The new floor manager was a man named Victor Ashton, and Victor Ashton had made it clear in the way that certain men make things clear, without ever saying anything that could be repeated, that he found Paige interesting in a way that had nothing to do with her performance reviews. He scheduled her for the closing shifts more often. He found reasons to appear in the back hallway. He complimented her in the particular tone that wasn't actually a compliment. Paige ignored it, then she deflected it. Then, on a Friday night after a 10-hour shift, she said, plainly and without drama, "Victor, I need you to stop." He looked at her with an expression that rearranged itself very quickly. "I don't know what you think I've been doing," he said, "but I'd be careful about throwing around accusations. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking you to stop." "Right," he smiled. The kind of smile that wasn't one. "I'll keep that in mind." Her next 3 schedules gave her the worst tables, the slowest shifts, the stations closest to the kitchen where the tips were lowest. She documented it. She told herself it was fine. She worked harder, which was what she always did when things got hard, and tried not to think about the fact that it was not actually fine. She didn't tell Elliott right away. She was still working out the particular calculus of what to share. And when in a relationship where one person had a family business and the other was trying to preserve the feeling that they were standing on their own feet. But Elliott noticed anyway. He noticed the way she came home tired in a different way, the way she was quieter than usual, the way she occasionally looked at her phone and then put it face down. He asked once, carefully. She said she was fine. He nodded and did not ask again that night, and she loved him a little more for it and also felt terrible. 2 weeks later, Victor called her into the office and told her that the Meridian was restructuring the floor team and that her position was being eliminated. He had paperwork. Everything was very formal and very correct, and there was absolutely nothing in writing that said what it was actually about. Paige drove home and sat in her car for 20 minutes before going inside. Then she called her sister. Then she called Elliott. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which was something she had noticed about him early on. The way he gave things room. When she finished, he said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Have you been documenting this?" "Yes." "Okay." A pause. "I know someone, an employment attorney, very good. I'm not trying to take over, I just want you to have options. This is going to cost money I don't have right now, Paige." His voice was very quiet. "I have 8 offices." She laughed, which surprised her. It was not really a funny situation. But something about the plainness of it, the way he said it without drama or performance, made something loosen in her chest. "Okay," she said. "Okay." The attorney's name was Denise Kaufman, and she was the kind of person who wore reading glasses pushed up on her head and asked questions that made you understand why being a witness would be terrifying. She reviewed Paige's documentation for 40 minutes and said, "This is a pattern. It's not airtight, but it's enough to open a conversation." They opened a conversation. Victor Ashton did not respond well to having a conversation opened with him. The Meridian's ownership, however, 2 brothers who had built the restaurant over 20 years and had absolutely no interest in a harassment claim, responded very practically. Victor was quietly let go 2 weeks later. Paige was offered her position back with a written apology that was formal and correct, and communicated a very sincere wish that she never mention this to anyone. She didn't want to go back to the Meridian. She realized this sitting in Denise's office after the offer was made, realizing she felt nothing about returning except tiredness. She declined politely, and then 3 days later she got an email from the publisher in Portland. She read it standing in her kitchen by the radiator that had finally been fixed, wearing Elliott's old university sweatshirt. She read it twice. Then she sat down on the floor, which she recognized was perhaps an unusual response to good news, and she stayed there for a little while because she needed a moment to understand that the thing she had been afraid to want had actually happened. The publisher wanted to discuss the series, all 3 books. They had questions about her vision, her timeline, her interest in doing school visits. They used the phrase long-term relationship. She called Elliott. He picked up on the second ring. "They want all 3, she said. It was the sound of a person who is genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy for someone else, and it was one of the best things she had ever heard. Lorraine found out about the book deal in the way that Lorraine found things out, through Elliott, who had made the mistake of mentioning it during a Sunday call with the particular warmth in his voice that his mother had learned to read very precisely over 71 years. She called Paige directly, which had never happened before. "Elliott tells me you've sold some children's books," she said. "A series, yes." A pause. "That's quite something, thank you." Another pause. Longer. "I owe you an apology." Lorraine said it the way she said most things, cleanly, without excessive decoration. "I was unkind to you. I assumed things about your character that I had no basis for assuming, and I did it because I was afraid for my son." Paige sat very still. "I've watched people treat Elliott as though he is less than what he is for 11 years, Lorraine continued. "I became suspicious of everyone, including people who didn't deserve it." A brief pause. "You didn't deserve it." "No," Paige said, gently. "I didn't know." Lorraine was quiet for a moment. "He's happy. He's been happy for months, and it's the kind of happy that I recognize. The real kind." "I love him," Paige said. It was the first time she had said it to anyone other than Elliott. "I know," said Lorraine. And then, after another pause, "The flowers you brought were very nice. I put them in the blue vase in the front hall." Paige blinked. "You kept them?" "Of course I kept them." A small sound that might have been the closest Lorraine ever came to laughing. "I'm difficult, not wasteful." The engagement happened on a Wednesday, which was statistically an unremarkable day of the week, which was exactly why Elliott had chosen it. He was a person who understood that the moments that changed everything did not always announce themselves. He had not done anything elaborate. He had come to her apartment with dinner from the Thai place she liked, and they had eaten on her small table with its uneven legs. And at some point during the meal he had set something on the table between them, a small box. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the girl in the red coat." Paige looked at him. "She was brave all along," he said. "She just needed someone to be standing there when she figured it out." The ring had been his grandmother's, a small diamond, clean and plain and very old. He slid it across the table and waited. "Yes," she said, before he could even finish the question. He smiled then. The full smile, the one she had been watching come in slowly since a Tuesday night at table 14, and it was, she thought, one of the finest things she had ever been given the chance to see. The wedding was small, which was what Paige had wanted and what Elliott had immediately agreed to, in the way he agreed to most things that mattered to her. 40 people, a venue with garden lights, her sister as maid of honor, and Elliott's closest colleague as best man. Lorraine arrived early and stood very straight near the entrance in a deep green dress and greeted every guest with the particular warmth she had been slowly, carefully extending toward Paige for the past several months. The two of them had reached something that was not yet easy but was honest, which Paige thought was probably better in the long run. Just before the ceremony, Lorraine found her in the small room off the main hall. Paige was standing at the window, holding her bouquet, being very still in the way that people are still before large moments. Lorraine came and stood beside her. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she reached into the small bag she was carrying and produced something, a bracelet, old gold, with a chain so fine it looked like it would disappear in sunlight. "This was Elliott's grandmother's," she said. "She wore it at her own wedding." Paige looked at it. "It isn't the ring," Lorraine said. "He already gave you that, and rightly so. This is—" She paused. "This is from me, if you'd like it." Paige held out her wrist. Lorraine fastened it carefully, with hands that were only slightly unsteady. They stood looking at it for a moment, both of them, in the particular quiet that exists before things become permanent. "Thank you," Paige said. "Thank you," said Lorraine, and the words held more than either of them needed to explain. Elliott cried at the altar. He had not expected to, and the surprise of it crossed his face before the tears did. The whole room saw it happen, and it was the most honest thing Paige had ever watched a person do in front of strangers. She held his hands and thought about a Tuesday evening when she had been carrying 4 plates of salmon and a man had been trying to hold himself together by straightening his jacket, and how everything from that moment to this one had been a series of choices: to speak, to stay, to show someone the drawing she kept in a folder she never opened, to say this is real and I am going to let it be real. The officiant asked if she took this man. She did. They signed the paperwork afterward in a little side office, and Elliott's best man witnessed it. And then his colleague's wife stuck her head in to say that the caterer needed a decision about the cake, and Elliott looked at his new wife and said, "Lehman?" "Obviously," she said. He laughed, and she laughed, and outside the garden lights were coming on against the early evening sky, and somewhere in Portland, a publisher had already sent the advance copies of her first book to the printer, featuring a girl in a red coat who finds out, at last, that she was brave all along.